Building your business was hard, and you only sell it once. With a focus on marketing, communications, digital, and service businesses, the TobinLeff M&A advisory team is dedicated to helping owners maximize and monetize their life's work. Welcome to the TobinLeff M&A podcast.
Hello, hi, I'm David Tobin from TobinLeff. Today I'm pleased to be joined by three of my partners, Mary McKinney, Bruce Bishop, and Chuck Gottschalk. Today we are going to share with you our experiences, our recommendations on how to help you get your M&A deal, your M&A transition and transaction over the finish line. What are the potential deal killers, showstoppers that may derail the M&A process to help you with your life's work, making sure it's realized when it's time to monetize your business? Just real briefly, TobinLeff, M&A advisory, exit planning consulting firm. We are mission driven. Our mission is to help owners maximize and monetize your life's work. To that end, we want to jump in, and this podcast video is going to be centered around three phases of the M&A process. We're going to start on the front end, how to prepare, how to prep for the experience. We're then going to cover red flags, potential deal killers during the go-to-market process when you're M&A advisory firm, business banker, investment banker are trying to bring you multiple offers. And then the third phase will be from the time you sign a letter of intent until hopefully the money is wired to you, what can happen during the due diligence process. So we're going to jump in. Chuck, you're up first, but if I may, I just want to tell the audience a little bit about you. Partner in TobinLeff for the past 4 years. Prior to that, he was the CFO, COO of a family office where it's like a mini private equity group where he dealt with both buy side, sell side opportunities. Prior to that, he was a senior manager with Ernst & Young. He's our numbers guy who really works to help our clients present and defend their numbers. So Chuck, you're up first. On the front end of the process, preparing for an M&A journey, what do you advise our listeners?
Yeah, David, thank you for that nice introduction. And what you need to do is you need to focus your financial statements on the GAAP basis. And for a lot of companies, the GAAP is this concept that's just not relevant to the day-to-day operations of the business. And they've built their companies over 20, 30 years, and they've never had to comply with GAAP rules for accounting. However, if you go to market, that's the language of business, GAAP. And that's the language of the banks, and that's the language of the M&A advisors. And you're going to need to convert your financial statements to a GAAP basis. And if you don't do that, you'll have tremendous risk that the numbers, when they do perform their due diligence, won't align with what you've presented. And it is expected that the numbers be on the accrual basis, not the cash basis as many people operate. And you have to follow GAAP. And there are revenue recognition rules, and there are issues with deferred revenue for companies. And so really the first thing you have to do is get your statements on a GAAP basis.
Great. What else do you advise on the front end, Chuck? Again, potential red flags, deal killers that could help them avoid that through the process.
Yeah, really, it all comes back to the same thing, which is what do you need to do to make sure your financial statements are accurate? It's not uncommon for our clients to pay their employees every 2 weeks and then record that expense in that form. That's not GAAP. You end up with, if you do that, 10 months that have 2 pays and 2 months that have 3 pays, and the 2 months that have 3 pays are significantly understating the income, and the months with 2 pays are overstating the income. And you can't do that when you go to market because you have to have numbers to produce on a monthly basis that are going to be accurate. So you have to put some processes in place to make sure that your numbers are GAAP compliant. Now, we always tell our clients you need to conduct your business as you always have. And I'm sort of contradicting myself there by saying that You have to be GAAP compliant, but yet you need to continue to conduct your business that you always have. You need to make adjustments, and you need to have a process in place to make the adjustments to bring the numbers in compliance with GAAP. And if you do that, then you'll have success throughout that process because your numbers will actually become more predictable and you will understand them better.
Chuck, I've heard you when we were on with clients or prospective clients, your theme around when you do go to market, the last thing you want to be talking about are the numbers. Expand on that.
Yeah, I say that if we do our job up front and we help our clients present their numbers properly, then you don't get bogged down in the numbers. And you don't want to be bogged down in the numbers because it takes you away from the value proposition of your business. And the value proposition of your business is going to be the vision. The numbers just support that vision. And if we have to spend our time constantly explaining numbers, why all of a sudden in March you show a big loss because you had 3 payrolls versus 2, it just takes away from the story. So if we do our job, the numbers speak for themselves. There are not a lot of questions or adequately explained up front. And you talk about the vision. And that's where the value in your business is. The numbers support the vision.
Great, great. We're going to shift. Mary, you're going to be up next. But if I may, I'd love to tout your credentials. Mary McKinney, a partner at TobinLeff, practiced business law for 20 years. So she was able to be involved with M&A transactions, family businesses, closely held businesses, both from an M&A and a business perspective. Then, because she's so driven, she also went back and got her MBA in recent years, combined legal with business experience. Mary, the same part of the process, how can you help owners prepare for that process so their deals do not get derailed?
Yeah, so it is commonly said that fortune favors the prepared, and that is so true throughout the M&A process. And a big piece of this preparation, so Chuck talked a lot about the preparation of the financials, is preparing yourself. And a key piece of this process is to begin with the end in mind, to spend time clarifying what you as a business owner really do hope to accomplish out of this transactional process and what matters most to you. Is it the amount of cash that you're getting at closing? Is it some sort of specific payments over a period of time? Is it what happens with your company after the transaction? How are you thinking through your team? Getting ready for the pieces of what matter most to you, writing those down, keeping them in mind and revisiting them throughout the process, because you're going to be presented with all sorts of other people's values and desires and goals, and they can be enticing and exciting. And you might change yours over the process, but always coming back to what it is that you want to accomplish. Another piece of preparing yourself is setting realistic expectations. So that would be around first and foremost, the valuation of your company. Where are you today? And that's a process that Chuck would dig into in deep detail with any business owner we're having a conversation with. How do we, based on what we're seeing in the market, what do we believe your business could sell for? And is that something that meets your needs? And if there's a lack of alignment, are there things that you can do to get from point A to point B? If the current value of your business isn't where you need to be to meet your retirement goals or other goals that you've set for yourself, are there steps that you can take? Some might be very short term, some could be much longer term, and you might decide that you're going to come back and go to market in 2 years, or it might be in 3 months after you've taken certain steps. Another piece would be to get in front of any weaknesses that exist. And this is me putting my lawyer hat back on. Tell your M&A advisor, tell whoever you're working with, everything. If there's issues that exist, there's an HR problem that happened, you have an issue with respect to the concentration of your clients. You have a lot of business with 30 or 40% or even more of your business is with one client. You might have, are there other owners of the business, people on the cap table who might not be on board with a sales process? And is that something that you might want to take care of and address at the outset? There's lots of issues that could come up here. Anyone engaging with you is going to ask all of these questions, but making sure that you're clear and honest and upfront, because you can deal with almost any of these at the beginning of the process. What's problematic is when they don't get disclosed, don't get dealt with, and then come up at the last minute and result in the deal value coming down or falling apart. And the last thing I'd say is that in order to negotiate and bargain and be in a position of strength throughout this whole process, it's important to know and develop a plan B. Everyone's going into this assuming that it's going to work. You're not going to go to market if you don't believe so. But things can happen. You could lose a major client. There could be things that happen in the macroeconomic system, or it just might not be the time for other reasons. What's another plan B that you can have so that as you're going through this, you don't get desperate. You don't get in a position where you need to take a deal that's not right for you. So always having another pathway in mind, developing what that is, getting comfortable with it. It might not be the best option, but it's a realistic and feasible option, will help to strengthen your bargaining power throughout the process.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Bruce, you're up. But if I may, I love sharing your experiences and how your travels, your wisdom can help our viewers and listeners. M&A guy through and through. He's been in this space for years. He was the CFO and worked in the US CFO for 2 global holding companies based in the UK, working in the corporate development side. I think, Bruce, you had mentioned you've been involved with more than 30 M&A transactions, large, small, on both on the buy side and sell side. So you've seen the good and bad as owners are preparing for the selling process. What can you share with our viewers?
Well, to kind of expand a bit on what Mary was saying, I think the way I would summarize it is you got to go into any M&A transaction and continue to run your business the way you've always run it, because there are chances that things could get in the way of the deal getting completed, and the buyer's going to want you to do that. They're going to want you to be consistent with the way you run your business. Some additional things that I think are important, and not to toot our own horns, but selecting a quality team of advisors up front early on in the process will really help you as a buyer to keep your expectations in line and really help facilitate getting the deal done. So I when I was on the buy side, if a company didn't have a lawyer early on in the transaction, we would probably walk away, because then we would know that they're not that serious. The other couple of things that I have to add to what Mary and Chuck have said is I think you need to make sure that your team, your key team members, are already adequately compensated. And one of the other key elements to that is to put in place what I call an equity participation plan, or what many people refer to as a phantom plan, because you don't want a key individual kind of leaving during the middle of the process, because that can derail a deal. The same as just a client leaving. I mean, it equally is important at times. I think, on the numbers side, absolutely agree that if you don't have quality numbers, your deal probably won't go through. And so it's good you have historical data all well positioned, but also you should be in the process, if you haven't started doing it already, is preparing monthly forecasts, rolling forecasts, so that you know where your business is. You keep a close eye, so that, because any sort of last minute surprise on a client base or in a forecast can absolutely derail a deal or significantly impact the valuation that you may have already agreed to. A couple other bits. I mean, I think it's really important to get your SIM really well designed and showing why it differentiates you from other potential opportunities, and in particularly articulate your investment thesis and growth plan, so that the buyers really understand that early on, so that we become a lot more interesting to them. And I think that's about all I have to add for that. So.
Good. We'll be coming back to you when we're talking about in market. Mary, why don't you take the lead on the second phase the second section of our podcast, which is from the time a business owner would say go, their banker, M&A advisory group, they're taking them to market. What can help keep that deal on track during that time period?
So I'd love to focus on the meetings that will happen between sellers and prospective purchasers, which is a huge piece of the go-to-market phase. And during that, sellers are going to be meeting lots of different buyers, different backgrounds. There may be financial sponsors, strategic buyers with different goals and plans. And a key piece of this for any seller is understanding the prospective buyer's needs, practicing empathy, stepping into the buyer's shoes. So in order to best sell your company, you need to understand, like you would with any of your clients, what are their pain points? What are their needs? And then become a problem solver. Understand how you can meet what it is that they're working through. And somewhat on the flip side of that, but related, also be realistic and honest about whether it's a good match. So have lots of detailed meetings to make sure that there is chemistry, that there's alignment of cultures, or where there's positions, places that there might be differences and approaches, that you talk through those and get in front of them. Values, vision alignment, ensuring that there is our cultures that can work together are a key piece of any deal. A lot of M&A transactions do not create value post-transaction for the buyer. And when that happens, lack of cultural alignment is one of the big things during the integration process that can cause not the deal to not go through, but earnouts to not be earned, or the transaction to not be what it could be for either party. So stepping into the buyer's shoes, understanding where they're coming from, meeting and solving their problems. And then the other piece of it, being realistic, honest, and open about whether this is the right match.
Great. Chuck, build on that. We're in market.
Yeah,
What advice do
when you prepare the confidential information memorandum, or SIM as we've been referring to, we put numbers in there, and those numbers are a point in time. And then instantly time passes, and those numbers are a month old or 6 weeks old, and people start asking, how are they doing? When they get the numbers, today and 6 weeks ago, that's what we have, and they want to know an update. And so, as Bruce talked about the forecast and the rolling forecast, you need to have a process in place. Now, a lot of this is really done prior to going to market and having this process in place, but you need a forecast in place, and that forecast needs to be realistic. And we oftentimes see clients will tell us that they only have a forecast of revenue of book deals or known deals, and they don't want to forecast the unknown. That doesn't work when you go to market. You need to have the unknown in there, because you need to be telling that full year story about where you are headed. And you need to be able to provide the updates. And what that requires is, again, back to the processes we talked about earlier, you have to have the process in place to close your books relatively quickly, because people want real-time information. They don't want to wait 2 or 3 months to see your data. They want to know how you're doing now through that process. So one of the things you need to really do is make sure that you have that upfront accurate forecast, and that you're constantly monitoring it. And then when you have the deviation from the forecast, it will happen. They're forecasts. They're not exact, predictions. You need to be in front of the messaging as to what's causing that deviation, and you need to explain why your expectations were not met. And it can be positive or negative. You can exceed revenue materially, and you think that was great. Well, not entirely great, because it might indicate that you don't understand your own business if you can't predict it, the upside growth, and they want to buy things that they understand.
Great. Bruce, we're in market. What advice to share with our listeners?
Well, I think it's always good to get ahead of as the discussions move on, and you're getting more confident that that the deal might close. It's a time to populate a data room. I mean, it's time to get the right information organized in a place that you can share it with the prospective buyer or buyers. Now this won't be an exhaustive list, because undoubtedly a buyer who's going to come in with a due diligence list that's going to have many, many items on it that you'll have to accumulate. But getting a start on this is really key because it also shows the buyer how serious you are and that you're organized and that you keep a good quality set of books. I think the other thing is, and kind of expanding a bit on what Mary was saying is the chemistry check is just huge during this period. I mean, you should be preparing answers to potential buyer questions and questions that you have for the buyer so that you make sure early on that there's a fit here. Because the last thing, you won't make an earnout if you don't have a good fit and a good rapport with your buyer. And to the other thing, it probably a little further down the deal, but before you get too far, you want to start bringing in a select group, a very small circle, and start talking a bit about what integration looks like and what to expect, post deal, and where we can get synergies that can help you achieve your earnout or maximize your earnout, and make for a more smoother entry into the new organization structure. So I think that's one other thing on is to make sure that you're clear on what you want to get out of an LOI when you get to that point in time. That you want to make sure that your key elements are in there, because the more time you can spend on that, the less time you'll be spending on with lawyers in drafting the SPA.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to what Bruce was saying about the LOI or letter of intent, and that's when you get an offer. You need to understand who is sending that letter of intent. Bruce talked about the due diligence that will be performed on your numbers. You also need to do due diligence on these people and your advisors, more importantly, perhaps, on these people that are sending these letter of intents in. And the reason you need to do the due diligence is oftentimes today we see people out there who present themselves and create a nice web page and look like a real buyer, but they're not. And you have to be careful about accepting an offer from someone like that, because you'll quickly find out that they haven't raised the capital to do the deal, and they want to put you under contract on this letter of intent and then go try to put all those pieces together. We don't suggest you go with someone like that. We want to go with someone who has the experience, who's done a deal or two, or at least has the balance sheet and the cash available to support a deal. So you need to do diligence on the buy side prior to that letter of intent, not after.
Because I've had experience where we didn't do probably enough due diligence on the buyer, and the deals dragged on and dragged on and dragged on, and we couldn't get it over the finish line. We ended up walking away and going with another deal, but it wasted a good 6 months at least. So
that's a great point, Bruce. That if you let your deal drag on, every day you're less likely to close. Yeah. You should have a target date, and you should track that, and you should have a Gantt chart, which is where you measure all the milestones against when you're going to close. And if you do that, you'll have a significantly better chance of closing. But if you just let this thing morph into its own, it can take months and months, and people become less excited, and things happen and changes, and then all of a sudden it just dies.
Deal fatigue is real.
It is. And this is great. We're progressing into the third phase of this episode, centered around now you hopefully feel good about the buyer. You sign the letter of intent and you want to try to get to the finish line. Mary, during that phase, what advice can you share, please?
So I'd love to talk about some of the legal negotiations and coming back to what Bruce began with, the importance of assembling a quality M&A team across the board, and a lawyer being involved at the beginning, someone who has experience in M&A transactions, and ideally M&A transactions in your industry can make or break a deal. So key pieces of that would be throughout the negotiations, the diligence process, staying focused on the things that matter while also pay attention to the details, but don't get us distracted by them. So there's going to be a lot of requests for information. It can be a slog, but you have to focus on every single detail and make sure you get the information out. But when it comes to terms and contracts and working through them, making sure that the whole deal doesn't get lost or distracted by small or minor or ancillary provisions. involving counsel, making sure that counsel has clarity and is focusing on the things that matter most, coming back to that end in mind. What is that really matters to you? How do you set this deal up to ensure that you're in a place to meet your earnout? How do you ensure that it's one thing to have the cash come into the door, to have a value that's associated with the deal, but how do you ensure that that's actually going to come through, and making sure that those terms are reflected in the contract and not getting distracted by small side things. And again, coming back to the idea of being a problem solver in this process. There might be things where it can get heightened and emotional. There's a lot of time that's spent. People might start to focus on something, or something comes up that no one had really thought might be an issue. It's whether it's a loss of a client or something else that comes into the process. You can get in front of and deal with and think through ways to solve the problem. You're going to be seen as even more of an asset after the transaction. It can open up the negotiations rather than turn into a war and a battle around them. And generally, they can go very smoothly. And experienced lawyers are so helpful in that respect. And in addition to staying focused on really what does matter most to you.
I think you have to be prepared to manage your legal team.
Yeah.
I've seen deals get just drag on because lawyers start arguing back and forth on points that are, as Mary points out, not every single, you don't have to win every single point in order to have a good quality deal. So it's important to keep your lawyers in line.
Chuck, jump in, please. We're in the element phase to due diligence.
Yeah, so if we've done our job up front, and we have our GAAP numbers and we have our forecast, due diligence is pretty easy from the number side. One of the things that I would recommend is that if you can get your software package to have your buyers be able to have access and have read-only rights to your information, you will cut the due diligence checklist. It's overwhelming at first. Many times there's 200 items on that list. You can cut that list in half simply by figuring out how to give them electronic access to the data. It also saves your resources that you don't have to have them pulling all these reports. They can pull their own reports. The numbers are what the numbers are, and you're not going to be able to change them. So there's no reason to not disclose them. But what I will say at this point in time, that you got to make sure that what you did up front was correct and accurate. And one of the areas that we see sometimes clients want to get aggressive in are what we call owner add backs or discretionary items, and they want to make all these adjustments to lift up their numbers and make them higher. Through due diligence, if you've done that, you'll get questioned and they'll figure out that all those add backs are not accurate. And if you start to overstate that income through that process, the due diligence is going to figure it out. And they will come out then, and at that point in time, you'll be staring at an adjustment to your purchase price. And you don't want to do that because you've already on this emotional roller coaster of the sale of a company. And we didn't really talk much about it, but in terms of deal killers, the emotional roller coaster you go on is a deal killer. And this is the point in time that on almost every deal that either the buyer or seller says, that's it, I've had enough, I'm done. You'll reach that moment, but you don't want to reach it because of the numbers, because that's where you can get really frustrated. And it should be on other things that are there that will cause that. But if you put those numbers together right up front, you won't have that aspect of the deal where all of a sudden they'll want to take a reduction into the purchase price they're offering because of discovery during due diligence. So again, all the work should be done on the front end, and then due diligence should be pretty easy.
Great. Bruce, please add.
Yeah, I mean, that point Chuck made about emotional roller coaster, I mean, it couldn't be more real, because this is why you really need a good quality set of advisors to kind of keep you in line, because it's so easy to get when a buyer asks or questions something and you feels like basically, oh, you're hurting my feelings kind of thing. Well, this is part of the transaction. This is how you're going to get it done. Rely on your advisors to help you through that. I think a couple of other things that just to add on is respond quickly to reasonable data requests. And this can be tricky because some buyers will just ask for information sometimes that's not necessarily really very helpful. But for the most part, you want to be back to that buyer as quickly as you can with any sort of due diligence question as they arise, because you really want to make them understand that you run a very tight ship, which I think we've made that point before. But the other bit is about surprises, and I think Mary touched on it a little bit, but I just say, don't sit on anything like a client loss or a key person leaving or good news, as Chuck was mentioning before. Get out there and get out in front of it, because that can really hurt your credibility and the buyer's desire to continue moving forward with the deal.
Great. So guys, we're going to go around, give our thoughts, closing comments, any phase, with the objective being helping our listeners when it's their time to go through the process to get their deal done. Chuck, you want to go first? And Chuck, real quick, we didn't touch on working capital. If you want to touch on that in your closing comments, because it becomes such an important phase.
So working capital, to digress for a second, is the concept of what you need to leave a buyer to operate the business. I refer to it as the gas in the tank. You're selling your car and you have to leave gas in the tank. And the question is how much gas you have to leave. And you don't have to leave it on full, but you can't leave it on empty. And there's a big range between full and empty. And so what we want you to do is leave maybe an eighth or a quarter of a tank. And what the buyer's reps are going to want you to do is leave 3/4 of a tank. And that becomes a battleground. And that battleground is best protected by understanding your numbers up front, by understanding what those numbers truly represent. Deferred revenue is a big battleground in that area. And you need to make sure that you understand how you're recognizing your revenue and if you're doing it properly. Such a fascinating story. David and I are working with a client that came to us recently who called us with a working capital question. And that working capital question led into an amazing story of the whole process and how they didn't sort of do the right things up front and what that's going to transpire to. And the end of the story is a very positive story, but there's a middle part that's not so great. So they went to market and they didn't have advisors. And then they came to this concept of working capital and they called us and they said, hey, can you help us out? And we said, sure. And we started to dive into the working capital. And what we found out was that their 2023 earnings were 50% higher than they had shown them to be. And it all came back to working capital. And they now better understand their results. And they are going to have to go back to the buyer and explain that it's a fundamentally different company and the working capital situation has changed. And they're going to get a better outcome. But there was a great chance that they were going to undersell the value of their company because they didn't do the right things up front. You have to make sure that you understand your numbers. I describe that oftentimes as you're selling a home, and everyone that's sold a home knows there's a home inspection, and the buyer does the home inspection. The seller should do the home inspection first so that they understand what the issues are. And the financial due diligence is the home inspection. And if you can do that up front, to the overarching recommendation, if you do your home inspection or your financial due diligence up front, you won't have any surprises and you'll know what exactly you are selling. So I really believe that that's the process that you need to go through. And the last thing I'll close with in this overarching area is to say, you're staging a home, just like we've seen on HGTV. You need to make sure your numbers are easy to understand. If they're complicated, people will scratch their head and people will pay a premium for things that they can understand. We've seen it on HGTV. It works in business deals as well. Get your house in order.
Good. Bruce, closing comments, please.
It's hard to follow that because I completely agree with all of that. As much as being more of an accountant than a lawyer or I'm a numbers guy as well. You can't emphasize it enough. And in particular, as you know, getting your historical data in place, but also once again, know your client numbers, know your projections, make sure that you can illustrate that you know how to run this business is absolutely key. And I think the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is really, really lean on your advisors, get the right people in place and really, really use them during this process because they can be hugely helpful in taking the emotion out of the transaction, and uncovering things that you may not think about with your own in-house team, even if you have a full-time CFO. They may have not been through a process like this before, and your advisors, more than likely, if you choose the right ones, have significant experience in this realm. So I think
Thank you, Bruce. And I love the way you put a little plug in for TobinLeff. Mary, please, any final comments?
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And thinking through the whole process like a marathon runner might is helpful. I mean, training, preparation, even visualization are tools that can be helpful throughout the process. So at the outset, getting your team of advisors in place, using them, relying on them to get you familiar with the entire process. What's mile 23 going to feel like? It's going to be pretty tough and miserable, but what's going across that finish line going to feel like? And what are steps that you can take now, like same way you might over many, many weeks prepare for a marathon in small bites? Get ready so that you can excel through each phase of the process so it feels a little easier, so you know what's coming. That'll help you get in front of the emotional roller coaster. That'll help you be the seller that's built all of the credibility by having those documents ready when you need them. The preparation that you do in advance of meetings, as Bruce talked about, to get all of those questions prepared, to know how you're going to answer the questions, to know what questions you need to have answered, to make sure that entire financial house is in order so that you can really enjoy pieces of the process. And at the very end, truly have a wonderful time with it. I mean, it's just knowing it's going to be tough.
David, if I add one concept too, I often tell prospects that, make sure that M&A advisor brings more than just a glitzy document to the table. Make sure that they bring other people with resources and skills that are going to get you through all of the hurdles of a deal. A beautiful marketing document is great, but that's only one part of the process. You need the other aspects.
Good. So if I may, just a few comments to highlight what you guys have shared. Mary said something, I think it's so important. Keep your eye on the prize. There's going to be so much noise, internal, external. It's a stressful time. Just know what that prize is. Be proactive. We talked about that. Get in front of any issues, potential problems. Take your time to build relationships through this process. You need to be efficient, to that theme that time can kill deals, but you cannot shortcut the needed time to get to know the prospective buyers. Do your values align? Is the vision? Because whether you're going to monetize 100% or there's an earn-out, who that buyer is going to be your partner in one form or another. My last comments would be, trust your instincts. If something just feels wrong, it's wrong. And you've built a business based on your vision, your instincts. That applies. So thank you for being with us. Just real quick. Chuck had mentioned we had a prospective client just call with a question. If any of you have a question, call one of our partners. The four of us are here. We have 7 partners. We're a team of 11 that includes 4 research analysts. If we can help, we'll be the first to jump in. If you just want to talk about the M&A marketplace, call us. There's no fee for that. So you can reach us at any time. Our resources are at TobinLeff.com. Thank you again for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the TobinLeff M&A podcast, produced by Main Impact with music by Holt Vaughn. For additional resources, case studies, or to contact a partner today, visit TobinLeff.com and be sure to subscribe or sign up for our emails to never miss an episode.